Do you believe it's better that characters drive plot, or is it better to have plot decide what the characters do?
Oh, absolutely, character. Like, character comes first. Their world needs to be challenged, and it has to be an organic. Like, if the characters are going through a movie just to service the plot, basically, then I guess that's fine if it's just like a Transformers or something like that, where like what you're getting into. But like for the cinema side of it, I guess, yeah, like you want, and in writing and editing in particular, all that stuff like comes back into play. Where, if you feel like the characters are doing things in service of the plot for the plot to like develop, the audience feels that, and so then they kind of get pulled out a little bit. They might give you a couple of shots. You may get like a couple of chances where like maybe the audience doesn't know exactly, and so they go along because there's one little like shady plot point that you kind of had to get through to get everything else to happen right, or you needed to cut a scene out, and so now it gets a little finicky. But if it happens too much, like that's where I think you kind of lose interest in the movie. Kind of deflates by the end.
Have you ever been attracted to a film because of the character, but not the plot? But it held your attention so much that you were able to finish it and you can name it as one of the films that you love, or at least like?
Yeah, of course. I just watched White Lotus, for instance, which is like that whole series is basically a character like study to me. And it's not really plot driven at all. It's obviously not a movie, but just because I just finished it, where I was absolutely engaged throughout the entire series because of those characters and who they were. So I think that that's absolutely part of, and especially, sometimes it's the casting, sometimes it's the writing. It just depends. But of course, absolutely, I think that can happen. And I think that those films also tend to think of them as character studies where they don't have that much plot in them. But I feel like that's not entirely true. It just may be disguised so well by the character and the writing that you don't recognize that there's still a plot that's moving through that story. And that's an important thing to remember as a writer and an editor in particular.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're lumping those two together, writer and editor, and they go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's just because of they don't always go hand in hand, but in my experience, like the last 4 or 5 years have been primarily in documentaries. But before that, it was almost exclusively narrative for me. And what I have found to be similar, even from narrative to documentaries, but in particular documentaries, is that you're really writing the story as an editor a lot of times. And it's not that dissimilar from trying to write a script like often. Like, you still have to hit your plot beats. You still have to figure out where reversals can happen and what can change the direction of the film to give it some new life when it gets stale. Like, all that stuff still applies in a documentary that it would as if you were writing a script from page one.
What character do you love in White Lotus?
I love the hotel manager. I think he's a fascinating character.
Why?
To watch.
What was it about him?
It's like the color of his like personality. I think all the characters are really, really great in that show because none of them are good or bad. They are and they aren't. They're so gray and like sort of relatable, but also like you kind of hate them, and it's just a fascinating like kind of place to be as an audience because you're not really sure what you want even to happen. You just like seeing who they all are, and then what happens when they get in the same room together, and like that explosion is just, I don't know. I think that's fantastic writing.
Do you always have to love a character to be invested?
No.
You can actually hate the character or intensely dislike them.
I think that like Breaking Bad is a great example. Like a lot of stuff right now I think is trying to toy with that line of can we have a despicable character that maybe gives the audience a carrot of hope that they might grow or be better, and then you know, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but that's like, there's like something that attracts you to wanting to find that out. Secession is another one for me that, you know, is like, obviously all these people are terrible, but they're also fascinating to see, like, you know, collide, and what this, like, where that story might even go. The acting, of course, like makes a big difference in that too. I think sometimes between whether the audience can sympathize even at all with somebody so despicable. I mean, that's I think really where the casting can kind of take something to another level too.
If you were to make another sci-fi film, would it be about the characters or would it be about the sci-fi world?
Well, I think that if you asked me that, you know, 10 years ago, I probably would have been more interested in the world part of it. I think now I am more interested in how the world can inform the story you want to tell with a character. But the character really still needs to happen kind of first. I mean, the character that you have needs to fit within the world to make a like, for a reason. I mean, everything has to be somewhat calculated in that sense. But the character is still going to take you through that story, and and the world is really only there to help either say something about the world we live in today, or about the character and what their struggle is that's relatable to us today, even though it might be alien in the context of what you're seeing. And so I think just, you know, I think the character side of things always wins out in the end over world building. I mean, like, world building is tough though too to do, and I've had a couple of cracks at it, and I'm still working through what's the best way to get all this information in without stopping it, or like, because people in general don't care about the world building as much as a filmmaker does. You know what I mean? Like, they just want to know if the story is going to captivate them and take them on an emotional journey or a ride in some way, shape, or form. And but the world building is like kind of the nitty gritty things that we get excited about sometimes, just because it may be what provoked the thought of even, diving into a story somewhere along that line. So I think it's just about trying to find the balance, because you can't really do one or the other. I mean, I think it's like you get here with the world, but then you get here with the character. In a sci-fi sense, like I think they have to inform each other. But my vote would always go, like, I think now in particular, to the character, and that being the source of the journey that you're really going on.
What questions are you asking yourself when you're creating characters?
I think the one that I'm asking myself most is how, sort of like, especially with the amount of content that's out right now or is coming out constantly, I think, it's hard to kind of reinvent the wheel, right? But I'm maybe a little bit doubtful to some extent about what I'm working on at the moment, because I'm not really sure where it's going just yet. But I'm constantly asking myself, is this good enough? And I almost always think no. And it's like a little bit of a, because as I'm striving for something that I know I want to hit, and so I'm like just really trying to hold myself accountable to, have I seen this character or storyline before? Like, is there a way I can make their introduction more appealing, in a sense of like, is that interesting? Is it something new? Does it tell me who they really are? Can I do this without dialogue? All those types of things I think is really more where my head is at right now, versus then like just like keeping it that's simple, I guess, with with what am I asking about the character? It's a little bit like, what can't I do with this character, and where do I want them to go? I mean, I think I'm a little bit more of an organic like writer in that sense, because even though I mentioned character is the most important thing, I still have to work out everything else for that character to be valuable too. You know what I mean? Like, and then I can kind of reverse engineer, and then if that takes me down a different direction, I follow it. But I'm not, it's a constant process of rewriting and rethinking and until you kind of get to the end. And again, it's like at a certain point, I guess you have to just believe that it's going to all work too, to go into production. But that's where I hope to go next. I want to get, I've been doing docs for the last like 4 or 5 years, and I'm really itching to kind of do a narrative again. So I'm in the middle of this struggle right now. And of course, we're just coming out of a, just an insane year where everything sort of feels like it's changed. And that's a struggle because this idea that I was working on, like kind of like was something that, was older, but I'm even asking myself, well, is it worthy of being a story now? Given the way, it's almost like, we had like a 9/11 moment where there was, like you just know that the industry has changed, audiences have changed, what they want to see has changed, and I have to remind myself that all that does matter is at the end of the day too, because you want to make this movie and then the next one also, and if you and I want to take into account that audience and who they are and what they want to see too.
Do you become obsessive with certain characters that you've written, that you've created?
No, I don't think so. I am obsessive in the sense of it's hard for me to not think about what I'm working on sometimes. Even like if I'm like right before bed, like say I want to turn my brain off, but it just keeps going and going and going, like that kind of stuff. But I'm not obsessive. Nothing. I think as an editor, you just kind of learned that like, everything can get cut. It may not be your decision, but somebody can cut something that you love, and you have to do it maybe, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that's just part of the process. Like it's never gonna stay the same on the page that it does by the end, really. And knowing that, I think just helps me kind of deal with like that kind of stuff. Like I'm like, oh, this isn't good enough. Like, oh, you know what? Let me combine these two characters into one because I don't know why I have two. Like those, like even though maybe if when I was younger and I was less experienced with so many different aspects of the process, I may have been like well, yeah, but we're gonna cast them and then it's gonna work. I think right now it's like the script has to sell itself too in order for it to get made. So I'm kind of way more in the camp these days of like really don't be precious too much with certain things. Notes are valuable, and one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was from another director who basically told me that whatever the note is, more than likely, it's actually like just doing that isn't going to solve anything. It may get you to the next point in that process, but really, most people don't know how to really give you like a really critical note that's valuable. Sometimes it's up to you as the receiver of those notes to figure out what they actually mean and then make those changes. And that's something that has proven to be invaluable for me, like since he basically gave me that advice, because every time I ever get a note, it's like, what does that actually mean? Because if I do the notes, it's almost never like really like there's one time actually where I got a bunch of notes, did them all, they liked it, and I hated it with a passion, and I asked to go into like a hole for a weekend to like try to figure out how to fix the notes, but not do these notes exactly. Like I knew that there was something wrong, but I hadn't figured out what it was, and so I went in down this hole, and basically all these notes were about shaving this character down. Like they didn't like her, let's say, and what I ended up doing is putting all those things back in that I shaved, that got addressed, and cut out this character's introduction, and apparently that. And I actually thought it was better too, but it took a lot of what does that mean? Why are all these notes? Like, because I don't not like this character, but the introduction was off-putting enough that that if I just introduced her in the next scene, it changed everything, and then all the other notes went away. And that's a really good example of, at least as an editor, but I know that happens in writing and all aspects of the filmmaking process, where taking the note that you're given and trying to figure out what exactly is the root of that is, I think, really where your work can really excel, and you can still play in the game, basically, because you're solving everything and making it better, and so everybody wins.